Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for attending today's IBM Middleware User Community Ask the Expert session. My name is Kelsey Tipshrini, and I'll be hosting today's webcast. Our topic for today is Apache Storm changes and ITNM reporting. All phone lines are currently in listen-only mode. There will be a question and answer session towards the end of the presentation. However, you may ask a question at any time during the presentation using the questions window located in the control panel. Also, look for a forum link in your chat box and feel free to continue any discussions after the webcast in this forum. Tomorrow, we'll have the recording and slides of today's presentation available on the IBM Middleware User Community website for you to access. You'll receive a follow-up email with a link to those archives. Now I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. We have joining us Calvin Moody and Jerry Swan. They are both ITNM software support engineers with IBM. Thank you, Calvin and Jerry, for joining us today. The floor is now yours.
Morning, everybody. This is Calvin. I'll be doing the presenting of this slideshow. Today we'll be covering ITNM 4.2 storm process and historical polling. These are new. Storm is a new item. Historical polling has undergone significant changes, so we'll be discussing both of these and their interaction with each other. The agenda will be why Apache Storm, Storm's functions and connections, Storm terminology, and Storm troubleshooting. For historical polling, we'll do the changes of historical polling configuration, poll data aggregation, and poll data sizing. Basically, this overview. The previous incantations of this use of raw poll data would generate typically a significant amount of data, resulting in slow response times and queries both in the GUI and the reports. And if the user was using TDW, the responses will be even slower. In this release, it was critical for us to use the new GUI dashboards and reports to be able to show poll data in a timely manner, both current and historical. To do this, we introduced numerous enhancements to make the data more meaningful, accessible, and reduce overall amount of data being stored. We're introducing summarization and reduction of data collected by the poller through an Apache Storm topology using exponential weighted moving averages, changing the NCO poll data to use database partitioning and the storage of poll data for more efficient access to the data, as well as simplifying the purging of poll data. Enforcing co-locations of NSIM and NC poll data. Changing also what and when we store for poll data. Also eliminating TDW. So what is Apache Storm? Apache Storm is a free and open source distributed real-time computational system. It allows for parallel processing of large amounts of data. Processing can be distributed across multi-threads, processors, and servers, running as a multi-job process per server, and it's used as a single server setup within ITNM. What is Storm's function as related to ITNM? ITNM runs the Storm topology for the purpose of aggregating raw data over different time windows. Those are the following time windows we have. It consists of bolts and spouts in the ITNM topology. The spout reads a poller, raw poll data from the NSIM poll data schema. The bolts process the raw data on a daily, weekly, monthly, and yearly basis. You can see more information about Apache Storm in that following link. And there will also be another slide, a little bit more detail about the terminology of the Storm terminologies in regard to bolts and spouts. I keep telling. Anyway, starting Storm and how does it run? Basically, you just use the ITNM start and stop functions. There's several Java processes that will be started underneath it. You'll have a single zookeeper entity, and also you'll have Storm worker processes, which can be used for debugging. The Storm does have a UI, but it's only for default use for debugging purposes and not recommended to use in default mode. Database connections, or there'll be two instances of Sprout connections, one for heartbeat and one for selecting raw poll data to be aggregated. And there'll be one active persistent bolt that has one connection to access aggregation tables. There'll also be an inactive session for Sprout. It has one connection, and it's just checking for heartbeats when to become active. This is a slide I mentioned about some of these terminologies, which may be new to some of us. Basically, I'm not going to read through all that. I have 41 slides in this setup, so I'll let y'all read through that if you want to go back and look at it. Also, here's a link for poll data processing link. And it has more details about spouts, bolts, and Storm connectivity. We do supply some troubleshooting slides here, some select statements that basically the first one identifies the active server, gives the last batch ID read from the poll data in the poll batch, gives time last batch was read and current database time. All these can be also displayed by using the validation script, which I'll go over in another slide. The other select statement is mastership audit trail. Identifies the Storm server and when it became active, and gives an initial batch read and start times. Some more select statements for debugging purposes can be run. Also, this is just the DB2 select on how you would run them. And here's another DB2 select on the mastership audit trail. Kind of display how it would look. Also, here's a link for additional queries that you might want to run on NC poll data queries. So relationships to database. Basically, the Storm is co-located on the back end. You typically only have one Storm topology per server. And the Storm topology is not domain specific, but active on one per database. And we get our, references for which topology is running and which domain we're going to be referencing through NSIM Storm topology config file, and it references DB login file as well. I'll have a slide on that. This references the files that Storm will be using. As I indicated, DB logins, looks for the backend credentials, ITNM properties files, also the NSIM Storm topology, Storm YAM, and zooconfig. There's not a lot of setup or configuration on Storm, but there are a couple of things you need to add. In supervisor.conf, you'll need the polar ID, the user ID is the primary thing you'll be putting in that. Basically, when you set up network management components, it'll ask for a polar aggregation ID or user and a polar aggregation group. That'll be where you get that ID from. And in the NSIM or NM Network Manager Storm topology properties, you'll have a the domain from which to retrieve the database credentials via DB login. You'll have to add your domain name in this one, and this one is just test. So when we're specifying historical poll data, we can specify what time periods when we want to store the data. By default, Network Manager stores historical poll data in daily, weekly, monthly, and annual times. You can turn off this storage of historical poll data for any of these periods. To turn off the storage of daily, weekly, or annual, you just VI the NSIM Storm topology properties file, and you make changes within it by setting those parameters to 0. There's also a link here for configuration, other configuration settings, or basically that particular configuration settings. You will need to restart Storm after making those changes. We mentioned the validate scripts. Here's just a rundown of what options they have for identifying master topology and showing current timestamps, connectivity to the database, and so forth, and encryption and decryption. Logs are stored in this and directory structure, and there's another select statement for debugging to see if we're actually reading poll data. And back again to the validation scripts. Basically, these are showing you whether we're connected to our configurations and general configuration for Storm, and shows your Java environment and tests how well Storm's running. It's just an output from some of those scripts on my test box. There are some known issues. Primarily the one we've seen is you have to source the environment. Seems like it's needed in order to start it many times. That seems like it has to be run. Another is if you have another Zookeeper process, another application that's running Zookeeper, you want to make sure that it's not utilizing the port that we want to use. If it is, you'll have to register another port for those processes. Also, if the Storm workers start restarting, they'll suggest that you have some inefficiencies or insufficient resources on your box. You'll either need to add some more resources or cut back on what you're trying to do. If you're running, say, weekly reports, you might have to cut back on those. Historical changes. This goes on to historical polling database changes, which was our kind of topic B that goes hand in hand with this. We'll have new views and tables to support data aggregation and new dashboards. NC poll data is now co-located within NSIM databases, and it's managed by the GUI the same way as other databases are. The database access configuration portlet manages the database configuration, connection configuration, and the web applications that can download to are configured in ITNM properties files. Here are some of the tables that are different from what we had previously, new tables, or for data aggregation, are the ones you see there: day, week, month, and year, and batch, and then the mastership audit trail and so forth. The ones that are used by Apache Storm itself are the master audit trail and the master check, which we did a couple of selects on there earlier. This is the old database setup for NC poll data. You'll see you had to name the schema. For the new one, you just put in NSIM, so you don't have to add that. That particular addition is put into the ITNM properties files at the bottom, where the schema NC poll data is listed there. These are just the views that are used by the GUI, so pretty much similar to what they were before. So here's some changes of how the data is offloaded. In previous version, there was no aggregation. When the poller was behind, it would just dump the data to a file, which in theory could be reread and reinserted in the poll data later. However, with storm aggregation and partitioning pruning in 4.2, we only store 1 hour's worth of raw poll data, and any raw data older than that is dropped along with the partition which contains. This means that it's no longer possible to reinsert data if it's more than an hour old. The new default behavior is to discard the data. Oh, sorry. Hold on. Got ahead of myself. It is possible to force the data to a file with a configuration change as shown here. However, it's only really for debugging purposes, since you can't really insert it again. Administering historical poll data, the network manager is set up by default to process raw poll data and store it up to a full year of aggregation historical poll data. Network Manager runs a real-time computational topology that runs on the top of the Apache Storm to aggregate the raw poll data into historical poll data, and stores the raw historical poll data in NC poll data database. This allows it to be presented in graphs and tables within the network views. You can also access the data on a per device or link basis from topology map within the network hop view GUI, network views GUI, and path views. More about poll data aggregation. Data aggregation is a process whereby poll data is aggregated in historical poll data and stored in the database from where it can be retrieved for presentations, graphs, and reports, as previously mentioned. In early releases of aggregation of poll data for storage and historical polling was performed by TDW. Version 2 onwards, aggregation of poll data is performed entirely with Network Manager. There is no migration path for historical poll data stored in legacy TDW integration. There's also some changes that affect when we're using large network topology. In large network environments, poll data can be high, running on a top of Apache Storm, distributed real-time computational system that performs a process on leaving streams of data, on live streams of data, sorry. Storm uses topology that's in ITNM Storm topology, which we mentioned previously, that defines the task of aggregating the poll data, and then Storm also manages the task and the data load. The storm topology processes the raw data to produce the daily, weekly, and monthly, yearly reports. The historical poll data processing storage system is designed to accept data from all instances of poll data engine, NC Polar across all domains within the NC Polar instance. Only data from poll policies that are configured to store data will be aggregated into historical data. As mentioned, it aggregates them into those 4 time slots. And there's just kind of reinforcing those time slots. Here's another link for more information on data collection and storage. Also supplied a link on calculating your data storage and system sizing for poll data. It's a spreadsheet designed to help you to initialize sizing plans for ITNM. It takes an important input. It takes input, the major contributions to system resources. It'll give you a good idea of what kind of RAM, CPU, and disk space you require. This is also a link on configuration, running, and managing storage limits. This is from one of those links about running, and where you can actually right-click on the device and set it up for or look at the actual collection of the data on that particular device. Purging of raw data. Basically, we do all the purging for you. It's each historical poll data is time-bound, and the table is partitioned in time slots. For example, like the day table stores historical poll data for the last up to 25 hours worth of data. So after that, after 24 hours, we get rid of that particular data. Okay. Any questions? That concludes my presentation.
Okay, we'll now open it up for questions. If you would like to ask a question, please do so using the questions window located in the dashboard panel. We did receive a couple questions beforehand that I'll just go ahead and read off, Calvin. Someone asked, what if Apache Storm doesn't start?
Typically, that's you either haven't sourced your environment. That's the main item that we've seen in the past. It's either since it started sometimes later, some people start it later, they forget to source their environment again. There are a number of instances where it hasn't started due to various configurations that were improperly set. I think the use of the validation script would be good for debugging that. If it doesn't start, then that would be the first 2 things I would check. But we have seen instances of just various configurations that weren't properly set that caused it not to start. So I would open a PMR if those 2 didn't work for you.
We do have a couple questions coming into that questions box. Like Jerry might be responding.
Okay. There's one question about, is there any documentation? There's quite a bit of documentation in the information guide on Apache Storm, and the couple of links that I presented. One goes to DW Answers. So there's, and actually in the binary itself, if you want to look at the actual freeware of Apache Storm, it has several links if you just want to know about Apache Storm. It's in there as well. Where does it? It runs on ITNM. I'm not kind of getting the last part of these questions. Somebody asked, what's the roadmap for TNM? 4.2 and beyond. I'm not sure how to answer that one, other than we've got a 4.2 version. I can't see these questions that well. Let me see if I can break this out bigger.
You should be able to undock the questions box from the panel.
Okay.
And resize it. Do you see that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've got it now.
Okay.
Someone asked if when you store data as part of the polling for chassis ping, can you store latency? Can you choose to store latency? Can you use these to have events? I'm not sure I understand that question as it's presented. You might want to email me and maybe have a little more detail about what you're asking. Anything else? I'm not sure if I got all of them, but I think I did.
Hey, Calvin, this is Jerry.
Mm-hmm.
I see a question from Rob about any documentation on Apache, install guide, polling guide, etc. Most of the links that you provided should be sufficient. There is some outside documentation on Apache. If you go out and Google it, you'll get some more information on Apache itself. But the stuff that we have in our documentation, like the spreadsheet and the polling storage information, I think is what you're looking for, Rob.
Yeah. Yeah, and actually if you look under the executable, the Storm executable, I think it gives you a whole bunch of links to Apache, the product, the freeware itself.
And Attilo, if you're still on, your question is it correct that it's possible only to store the last 1 hour of raw data for polling policy? I'm assuming you mean if you go in and set the other settings to 0, as Calvin mentioned. I think it's the NMS Storm topology properties file. I can't remember exactly which file.
Yeah, that's it.
Then if you set the others to 0, then that's what it should do, is just store that 1 hour. If that's not your question, please update your question with something that's maybe we can understand better.
Someone said, even though the answer isn't that easy, when would you choose ITNM PM over ITNM for performance management? I'm not.
Dominic, we'll have to collect that that question and provide you with an answer. I know previously TNPM was a more robust reporting platform. I'm not sure if that's the case now that we've got that we've changed it up to where we're not using TDW. I don't know if that's been tested or not as far as which one is a better alternative. And Francois, about your question about storing poll data, like for chassis ping, you can choose to store latency. Can you use this to have events? Again, we'll have to collect that one and see if we can find an answer for you.
Kelsey, I think our emails are supplied with this presentation, so they could email us if they have something else.
Did you include those in your presentation somewhere? I can always send them out afterwards.
No, I didn't. I can send them to you, or
okay.
I can type a message in here.
Yeah, actually, if you want to go ahead and just send a chat out to the entire audience with your email addresses, so everyone has those if they need to contact you.
Yeah, I just sent it out.
Perfect.
I just sent mine out as well.
I just got a Kim, one of our L3 is listening in on this, and I think there was a ask if you could store the pings, or you can store latency. She says for pings you can store latency, round trip time, and record to indicate success or failure. You cannot alert based upon latency or RTT, round trip time. So it's kind of both. But I think, yeah, an email might be better to kind of clarify that. Yeah, whoever asked that question, if they would email me, I can get it to SME and find out the answer, and maybe supply a little bit more detail with it.
All right, if there's any more questions, go ahead and type them in that question box. If not, we'll close the session out here in a couple minutes. Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions. Thank you all for attending today's webcast. Feel free to continue any discussions in the Optimizing IT and Service Management discussion forum on the IBM Middleware User Community website. The link is located in your chat box right now. Again, the recording and slides we'll have available tomorrow in the webcast archives. You'll receive a follow-up email with a link to those. As you exit, please take a few moments to fill out the post-event survey. This helps us improve future events. We truly appreciate your feedback on that, and this concludes today's event. Thank you all and have a great day.